This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Adam Caplan's here, host of the Inside the Birds podcast, which you can get on all podcasting platforms and their YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. We had Eagles OTAs this week. We had a good conversation with Colin Thompson about how important those OTAs were for a player like him. But what is happening at the OTAs this week? What are some of the storylines out there? We'll get into that. We'll look at the second part of the schedule. And we did have a little news this week around the team. Adam Caplan, Devontae Parker, the wide receiver, he retired. We talked about him on Tuesday, but they did sign John Ross. Is this a replacement? Ross, kind of a surprise. He was at the rookie mini camps as like a tryout basis, but Ross is in, Parker is out.
Yeah, Mike, good to be with you. Yeah, so interesting story about John Ross. We put this out on Inside the Birds like 4 or 5 years ago. It was either 2019 or 2020. So the Eagles actually called the Bengals about John Ross when he was a Bengal, when he really struggled, Mike, through injuries, and the Bengals reached for him. This is one of these stories that, Moshe and I were doing local radio in Philly in 2017. And two things happened in that top 10. John Ross came out of nowhere to be the 9th pick overall, and he was really supposed to be an early to mid-second round pick. And this is the draft that when the Bears shocked the world and traded for Mitch Trubisky, we could not figure out who they were trading up for. So that was definitely an odd draft. That was actually here in Philly. John Ross has world-class speed. At least he had it. Now, as I understand it, his workout, what happens at a rookie tryout, you're actually practicing. His work that he did with the Eagles recently at that rookie minicamp was good enough to get him back here. He's guaranteed nothing. They'll see how he does the rest of OTAs. If he does well there, he'll go to the mandatory camp. If he does well in the mandatory camp, he goes to training camp, and then you see what he can do. I'll say this. Without Devontae Parker, there are jobs open. There are only 3 jobs that are guaranteed. I would tell you that Paris Campbell, unless he gets hurt, he's going to be their 3rd receiver. They don't know who their 4th, 5th, and if they want to keep a 6th is. They have no idea. They're all guys who really have not done much at all. The Eagles like Johnny Wilson a lot. Their 6th-round pick, as we noted, as soon as he was drafted, we were told he's not playing tight end. No matter what people are speculating, it's not happening. He actually confirmed that. Joseph Ngata's back. Austin Watkins is a guy they gave some guaranteed money to. They like him, but again, he's barely played in the NFL. He's sort of a young journeyman. He's bounced around a lot. Jacob Harris is my dark horse, so I follow his career pretty closely. Remember talking to the Rams how excited they were about him. His rookie camp in 21, and then he got to training camp, did great, and unfortunately suffered a torn ACL in 21. That was his rookie season, 4th rounder out of Central Florida. He played tight end in his college career, got moved to receiver, that got moved back to tight end. Now he's back at receiver with the Eagles. The Eagles are lining him up at receiver right now, I'm told, so he's a little bit older. He just turned 27, but you know what? That's the guy, if you're looking for someone to surprise in training camp. And again, this is so early, Mike. We're in OTAs, which is a passing camp. There's really not that. There's never anything definitive in OTAs. It's why we don't do, on our show Inside the Birds, Mike, we do an overview once they're done. We don't do play-by-play of it. It's a waste of time. We give you what we call predictive information, if we can, about what it looks like after like 6 or 7 practices. We'll do that. But this kid, Jacob Harris, is a guy that people should have on the radar. The Eagles don't have any experience behind the top 3 guys, and they're looking for somebody now without Parker, and they're not done. They've got through OTAs and obviously leading up to training camp to add another veteran.
Yeah, absolutely. The wide receiver spot a little. We talked about Tuesday when Parker went and retired. I don't know if they were guaranteeing Parker to even make the team, but it's certainly eye-opening now that they don't have that outside guy. John Ross is in, former 9th pick, ran a 4.22 40. That put him on the map. and we'll see what he brings when he gets to training camp. He gets a 1-year deal to come into Philadelphia with the Eagles for training camp, and which, by the way, the OTAs are paused for right now. They'll have a couple more sessions. I think on the 28th is when they're back at OTAs. But we know the schedule. That came out last Thursday. We started to break that down last week on the show, and we're kind of getting inside information from Adam on their games that we're looking at here. Take a look at the Week 5. They'll have a bye. Last week we looked at the first 4 games. You can go back to our Friday show last week and watch that on the Football at 4. Week 6, they're going to play Cleveland here in Philadelphia. It's one of the few 1 o'clock games here. This was a playoff team last year, but it's going to have a different look this year.
Yeah, so we did on our Tuesday segment, we did the first 4 weeks, Week 5 with a bye. Now, Week 6 is at home against the Browns, and this is October 13th at 1 o'clock start, as you said. Kevin Stefanski, head coach, he fired his former offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt, who's now the OC in New England. He brought in Ken Dorsey, who got fired last season by the Bills. It's kind of odd how that works out, Mike. But the big story here, and it's a major story for this football team, is Deshaun Watson coming back. Talking to the Browns, they think he's going to be ready for training camp. I don't know how much he'll throw in training camp. He's coming off of major right shoulder surgery. He had 2 issues with it. He's not played good football since 2020. They're locked into his contract for 2 more seasons at fully guaranteed money.
Jeez.
Yeah, this season and next in 25, so they're stuck with him. Nobody would take him, obviously. Nick Chubb, their star running back, comes from major knee surgery. They really don't know what to expect from him, truly. I could just, when you talk to people, you could hear it in their voice. They love Nick Chubb. I mean, it's a great story of development, but he's been hurt a lot. It's why they brought in Deontay Foreman. They've got Naheem Hines that they signed also, who's coming off a torn ACL. So they've got some injury issues, really good offensive line. Jim Schwartz running this wide 9. Everybody knows what that looks like. Really good defense. This will be a very competitive game. But where I think the Eagles will have their way is Watson has not played competent football in so long. I'm skeptical. He needs to show it to me before he plays the Eagles if he's back all the way and can play good football. Now, their offense, one more thing before we move on to Week 7, which will be the Eagles' first divisional game. They're going to play what we call more 11 personnel than 12. Why? Because they added Jerry Jeudy. That means 3 receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 running back to go along with Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore. So it's going to be a little different, and I look forward to seeing how they do it. And by the way, Ray Bubba Ventrone is their special teams coach. Where do you go to college? Villanova.
There you go. All right, let's look at week number 7 when a division rival comes into town and not a lot of high expectations for the Giants. The Eagles have kind of had their way with the Giants over the last couple of years here, but this is a team that also will have a little different look because Saquon Barkley is now in Philadelphia.
Yeah, this is obviously, the hype will be ridiculous. This game is at the Giants. Another 1 o'clock game. Daniel Jones is practicing, by the way. Now, I don't know how much they're letting him work. Drew Lock is his backup. He had the Eagles killer. 1 game last year. The Eagles should have won. Somehow they lost that primetime game. The running game is questionable. Devin Singletary is coming off a career year with the Texans, but Texans didn't want him back. Malik Neighbors is their first-round pick at receiver. They're another team that's going to run a lot of 11 personnel. Mike Kafka is their play caller, former Eagles quarterback. And they want more of a spread scheme. Their offensive line, they added John Runyon Jr. as their left guard. Jermaine Illuminor, who was a tackle guard for the Raiders. I met Jermaine at the Super Bowl. He apparently grew up a Giants fan. Well, we'll see how this works out for him. The offense is just not as dynamic. And Darren Waller, everyone I've talked to thinks he's going to retire. Everyone knows him, told me that. But he hasn't retired yet. So we'll see what happens there. Defensively, a complete change on defense. Shane Bowen, who's a Mike Vrabel disciple, he'll run a 34 front like Wink Martindale did, but the philosophy and the scheme is really different, just the way that they implement everything. So it's going to be different, no question about it. And this is the game out, so the Eagles will be favored. The game's on the road. Depending on how the Eagles are playing, they could be a touchdown favorite. I can't imagine this team will be any good. Look, they did trade for Brian Burns on defense. I should mention that. They've kind of reshaped their secondary the last couple of seasons. You hope that they'll be better. 2 years ago, Daniel Jones was very good. Last season, before he tore his ACL, he was bad. This is, to me, a 6 or 7 win team, and the Eagles clearly are better.
Yeah, you would think that this, as the over-under we went over a couple of weeks ago, 6.5, I think, is the over-under
that makes sense.
for the New York Football Giants. Tough part of the schedule. I think one of the toughest stretches starts in Week 8. You're going to Cincinnati. It's on to Cincinnati, says Bill Belichick, and the Eagles will be out there October 27th. This is a really good team if they're healthy.
Yeah, this game is a 4:25 game. Joe Burrow's doing fine coming off his wrist surgery. He's ready to go. They traded away Joe Mixon. Zach Moss, who led the NFL in rushing, I think, for the first 4 weeks, for Jonathan Taylor return for the Colts. He's a grinded-out sustainer. Chase Brown is his brother, obviously sitting place for the Eagles. It's not a great backfield. Like this is I know they're a passing offense. They lost their number 3 receiver in Tyler Boyd to the Titans. Now they didn't really make an effort, as I understand, to bring him back. So it's going to change a little bit. Look for Jermaine Burton to be their 3rd receiver, the 3rd rounder from University of Alabama. When you look at the Bengals, Mike, not a great offensive line. They've upgraded over the years, but it's very average. Amarius Mims will wind up being the right tackle of the future. It's a very beatable offensive line, and with this Eagles defensive front, you would think they would have their way. Defensively, under Lou Anarumo, you know what's funny about him? He was like 4th or 5th on their list. The other guys that Zach Taylor tried to hire, they didn't want the job, and Anarumo kind of came out of nowhere, and it's actually worked out. He's really good. He interviewed for the head coaching job that went to Jonathan Gannon a couple years ago. They're kind of remaking the back end of their defense. It's a pretty good defense, by the way. They get pressure. They've got some young outside corners. Mike Hilton is their nickel slot corner. He's really good. He's a good blitzer. The Geno Stone. The Eagles were not interested in him, as we reported on Inside the Birds, but the Bengals sure were. They got him. Von Bell's back after the Panthers cut him. He used to play for the Bengals. So they're remaking their secondary. This is a good team. This will be a great test, Mike. I would agree with you. That this is when, and we'll talk obviously about we'll do one more game here, but this is not going to be easy.
No, in fact, if they're healthy, this is a team that kind of came out of nowhere that went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. They probably have those same aspirations as they head to OTAs and training camp. The Bengals in Week 8. Jacksonville in Week 9. This is a team that went to the AFC Championship game, then did not make the playoff. They had a similar kind of collapse down the stretch that Philadelphia had. Looked like they were flying high at the top of that division, and then didn't even make the playoffs last year.
Mike, Doug Peterson, and obviously they love Doug after his first year, but I mean, let's call it like it is. They choked, losing 5 out of 6. It was one of these things like you could imagine how this possibly happened. Now, what happened was their defense collapsed. Mike Caldwell, another former Eagles assistant coach, pretty much his whole staff got fired. Ryan Nielsen comes in from Atlanta, did a great job with not a lot of talent. They were very stingy on defense. But let's talk about kind of their offense first and their defense. You might remember 2 years ago, the Jaguars came to Philly. They got a big lead. It rained the entire game. The Jaguars got up 14-0 while Trevor Lawrence turned the ball over 5 times, 4 fumbles and a pick. Eagles came back to win. Somehow they won that game. And if you really look at it, they're the team that overachieved 2 seasons ago. They've got a good offense. Trevor Lawrence has got to play better. The Press Taylor, their offense coordinator, Doug Peterson handed the play calling during the season, Mike, to Press Taylor, and it was not good. The fans wanted Press Taylor fired. I mean, if you look at social media, I don't know if you ever noticed this, it was like a movement to get Press Taylor out of there, and Doug wouldn't do it, so he fires the sacrificial lamb, so to speak, with the defensive staff. They're spread West Coast. They're heavy 11 personnel. Their receiver group is different now. It's changed. Gabe Davis gets reunited with Chad Hall. Chad Hall, another former Eagles player. Chad Hall is one of the best receivers coaches in the league. Gabe Davis used to work with him in Buffalo. Brian Thomas, the first-round pick. Christian Kirk's back from his groin injury. Evan Ingram's the tight end. Travis Etienne's really explosive. They're not much of a running team. They're more of a passing offense. And then defensively, Mike, they run a 34 front. They've got I really like their front. With Eric Armstead comes in, who's been a former Niner first-round pick who played for Chip Kelly, by the way, at the University of Oregon. Roy Robertson-Harris, Trevon Walker, and Josh Allen are your edge rushers. Walker is a really big-time player. He hasn't quite lived up to being that top pick 2 years ago. He's starting at corner because they're really weak at corners. Ronald Darby, who kind of revived his career. Revived his career with Baltimore last season. He's had a lot of injuries. I mean, 7 years ago he won a Super Bowl with the Eagles. And their other corner, Tyson Campbell, was hurt for most of the season. And Darnell Savage, who we reported this on Inside the Birds, the Eagles pursued Savage. They wanted him, and it was between, I think, the Jaguars and the Eagles for him. But they've got a good, not great defense. They're talented. They just underachieved. Like 2 years ago, they played really well. Lewican, the Yale linebacker, highly paid, really good player. Devin Lloyd has not lived up to being a first-round pick yet at linebacker. But overall, Mike, this will be a challenge. You're right. This is not an easy game, and again, it is a Sunday night game at home against Doug Peterson, the Jaguars.
Yeah, they have that little stretch there where they're out of the 1 o'clock stretch. They go into some primetime games, and I think it's a primetime part of their schedule. It starts with that Cincinnati game, and it rolls on through that. We'll talk about that more next week with Adam Caplan here on the Sports Bash Live Football at 4. Jacksonville, too, it was another team that you mentioned that kind of like choked their way out of the playoff. They lost 5 of 6. They weren't quite as aesthetically unpleasing, though, as the Eagles were, right? They weren't that bad.
Right, exactly. No, but defensively they gave up a lot of plays. But I think what happened with them was that Christian Kirk suffered a groin injury, had surgery. Zay Jones, their top backup receiver, had a knee problem. He couldn't play, and when he played, he was struggling. And Lawrence started to regress. Lawrence was banged up, shoulder injury, ankle injury. And the scheme, it's not the play calling so much. The schematics of what they were doing just didn't work, and people were pointing it out. It was bad. I mean, they folded. Like they should have won that division.
Absolutely.
But one thing Texans were incredible. I mean but it's just so funny. The year before, the Jaguars came out of nowhere. They were given a 5.5 win total by the odds makers. Last year, the same total, the Texans, and you saw how that worked out.
All right. OTAs continue next week, and, of course, we'll have more coverage of that on Football at 4. Adam's back next week. The boys will be back here. You can check out the Inside the Birds podcast, which you can get on all podcasting platforms, and their YouTube channel for Football at 4 and all of their great content. Check out the YouTube channel. Just search Inside the Birds. Adam Caplan, happy Memorial Day weekend, man. We've reached it.
You too. Thank you.